Hello, today I'm going to give a summary of The Invitational Christian by Dave Daubert. Just to introduce how I take my notes so you can read them, is I put the chapter number over here in the top left-hand corner. So this is chapter 8, and then the chapter title is up at the top of the page. Following up is the chapter title. And then down along the marginal line, you can see little numbers, and those numbers are actually the page numbers. So I can see on page 69, the author said it was important to still be welcoming. And then these several points are on page 69 up until you hit page 70. And that's where that quote comes from. So I hope my notes are useful to you and you can use them in whatever you find fit. Okay, there's a short introduction on this book. And he just kind of introduces the book, saying he wrote it to address the angst that is present in the church in this changing world we live in. And he also mentions that mainline churches have relied on social position to bring people in and less discipleship, and he hopes to address these in the book. In Chapter 1, A Changing World, he addresses the fact that the church life in today's context is shrinking and aging. And he states the fact that America is unique as it was the experiment to seeing if we could cultivate a national identity without an official religious expression. And he addressed the fact that there were many Christian leaders that took a large part in the founding of America, but it was not made to be purely a Christian society or only for Christians. And then he said about the reasons why the church peaked in the 1950s, and he gave 3 different reasons. First, it was the post-World War II expanding of America, and the church was included in that. 2, religiosity was viewed as the good. That was synonymous with American. And then atheism was synonymous with the USSR and the bad. And then the 3rd reason was that soldiers returned from war, and then they made new families and more children, so there was just more people in the churches. So since then, less people are going to church, about 1/6 of the people of the USA, and even regulars are coming less often. Many church members don't invite others to join them. And then he offers a Bible reading to reflect on this, and he gives 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 1 through 11. Okay, in chapter 2, titled, Why Should Anyone Come?, he addresses that the desire to help a congregation is not enough of a reason to invite somebody. And then he says that the idea of save the congregation is an implicit mindset that you'll find in a lot of congregations, and it's best to avoid that, carrying that yourself. And then he shared a story about a gentleman who implied that the idea of having a bigger congregation was so that the existing members of the congregation could give less money. Yeah. And he also said that if they aren't already here, they're not respectable. And that was said by a member of his church council. And that hints back to like the 1950s idea of, the good religious Americans or the bad USSR atheists, right? And then he says that the world outside of the church has become less churchy. And then that all those reasons are, bad reasons to try to invite people into church. But there's 2 different positive reasons why. Or 2 different ways to invite people in. The church participates in work that matters to God. So this is based off the core values, principles, and mission and priorities. That the church knows why it exists. It doesn't just exist for itself. And then this identification of what the principles, values, mission, priorities are also helps them identify their strengths and weaknesses. And also, being a member of the congregation should help deepen people's spiritual lives. Making a life-changing ministry with a sacrificial spirit to love like Christ creates a feeling of wholeness and fulfillment and purpose. He also states that millennials, despite largely not being associated with churches, have a great interest in learning about Jesus and God and a meaning of life. So that is a pull-in for them. And if congregation is not excited about doing this, then do they believe they are important to God? And then the reflection text for this chapter was Acts 2:37 through 47. Chapter 3, Quality Matters. The quote from him based off of surveys he did with some of his home churches, he being the author. People value meaningful sermons more than any single aspect of congregational life. And then he points out that if something in the church is not quality, whether that's the building itself, the worship space, the music, the sermon, are not good, the congregation is less likely to invite people. And he states that being average is just not good enough. And he said to prepare for worship like one would a guest coming to one's house. And he used the example of when someone's coming over to your house, you'd vacuum and you'd clean and you'd prepare the house for them and prepare food and all that. And he says it's no different when you invite someone over or when you have a church service, how that might be the potential first meeting of new people in the church. So, the sermon needs to be good and the worship music needs to be good and the worship space should be clean and ready, Make the church inviting by working on getting better. So when the church gets better, it gives congregates more confidence in their efforts in inviting people in evangelism. And a reflection text for this chapter is Philippians 4, verses 8 and 9. Chapter 4, Knowing Our Story. The church should offer the God that we meet in Jesus Christ. Christianity is unique because God made the universe and continues to be involved in the day-to-day operations. Emmanuel means God with us. So the congregation should help others see and make sense of how God is working in our lives. This question should be asked of individuals in congregation, how God is working in their lives. And a shortfall, congregation is religious but not spiritual. I think that's a common temptation, especially in mainline Protestantism, and that's what he really points to, is the fact that we don't look to how God is acting in our lives, we just go to church because that's what you do. Church should be a place where spiritual journeys are acknowledged and spiritual stories explored. People come to encounter the living Christ today, not just what Jesus did 2,000 years ago. Lead a congregational small talk about religious things, and he points to the fact that often congregations before the service are not talking about what God's doing in their lives, but about the weather or sports or news or just general things that you'd hear at any other coffee shop anywhere else. Being able to share understanding of God is essential, and that should be reinforced through preaching and learning. Individual prayer life, reflection, and reading are essential and should be encouraged as well. And the reflection text for this is John chapter 1, 29 through 34. Chapter 5, Address Their Fears. Mainline Christians are afraid to invite people to church, and there's many reasons that are explained. One reason is the church has a fear of rejection. And he points out that studies suggest that people that are not connected to any kind of spiritual entity, churches, around 30%, are still curious about religion and meaning and purpose in God. So that fear of rejection should be handled in such a way that people are interested in looking for answers. The church has a fear of fanaticism, and that risk. The author says is very low, especially being mainline Protestant. And the way to really handle that is being willing to take a no, so to not get into a debate or an argument with somebody. The church has a fear of harming a good relationship, and the author points out that a good friendship involves some risk and vulnerability and honesty. So why wouldn't you be able to be vulnerable with your friend? Is your friendship really what you think it is if you can't? The church has a fear of appearing stupid or foolish, and this lack of confidence should be addressed in two different ways. One, elevate and encourage what they already know about God. And two, the leaders of the church should equip them to talk about their faith. And the reflection text for this chapter is Luke chapter 1, 26 through 38. Chapter 6, Give Them Tools. The pastor points out the importance of equipping people to invite others in. Ways his friend's church has grown. So he gives a story about a friend who was a pastor and radically grew at church. And this was done in a threefold way. 1, there were physical invitations with explanations of how to use and the importance of using them. And they were revised and really pushed 4 different times throughout the year. And there were also special invitations sent out and extra services during Christian holidays such as Christmas and Easter. And he would send 6 individual snail mail cards to the families who was about to have a baptism. So if someone was about to have a baptism, he'd have them send 6 cards to close family and friends who might want to be there for that. And then the author states that concrete invitations really help, and that websites should be clear for the stranger and it should be easy to see what the church is up to and about, because oftentimes it's considered to only be used by church members, but that's false because many people that are not in the church will encounter the church the first time through the internet. He talked about a weekly blog, record emails of visitors early, and you are able to send them sermons, and post the sermons. Consider running a podcast. This serves as a way for the congregation to re-invite those who have fallen away. He also states that social media is a tool and not all in all an invitation strategy in itself, and it must be used regularly and well. And it should be authentic with who the church is. Don't put off a false persona. Don't throw out there that you're very, evangelical if you're very classical. Don't throw out that you're very modern when you're more of a classical service if you're not, because then people will come to your church and be disappointed. Nothing replaces face-to-face relationships, so that should be remembered when you are running these online outreach programs and efforts. Reflection text is 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 3 through 8. Okay, chapter 7, the importance of with. In this chapter, the pastor, the author, really talks about how important it is to accompany those who church members invite to church. And he talks about how it can be scary for those who have never been or haven't been in a long time. And he tells a story of how he was invited and accompanied to church by some of his friends when he was in college, and how that really got him involved to today where he's a pastor. The use of sometime in an invitation often means never going to happen. That sometime never comes. Okay. And physical location makes it easier to invite if the person's close. You could potentially carpool with them, like I'll pick you up and we'll go to church together. But if carpooling would be an awkward thing to do or impractical just because of the location of where they live, maybe say meet them in the parking lot of the church and they can go in together. That way you serve as a source to lower the anxiety. And then after the service, try introducing the person to some of your friends and other members of the church, and take them out for food afterwards, which is helpful but not crucial. And a reflection text for this chapter is Acts chapter 8, verses 26 through 40. Chapter 8, following up. The intentional follow-up is needed and important. Now, face-to-face, as always, is best. He says that his church, what they do is they send a letter from the pastor directly, and a handwritten letter from the person who did the inviting. And a phone call should take place. If received contact info, send them an email. But also offer them a way to unsubscribe so you don't come off as the spammy church. Important to still be welcoming. Continue to accompany, offer refreshments, encourage, and re-invite them. Interact with those who are alone in the service, Hold regular introduction classes to introduce theology and church teachings for the newcomers, and celebrate new commitments to the church, new membership in the church. Invitation is the first step in a long-term process of engaging new participants in a relationship with Christ, is a quote from the text. And a reflection text from this chapter is 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 10 and 11, and the postlog of this book. It's suggested that you read and discuss this book in a small group, and it has to be put into practice in order to master or to improve these skills. You should find others who can hold you accountable and you can hold them accountable with inviting people and reaching out and the several steps in there. Equip people with mission of church to carry out the mission. Pray for God's insights and blessings in your efforts, and to remember that this is God's work and not yours. Okay, that was my introduction of the Invitational Christian by Dave Daubert. If you enjoyed this video, please like the video, share with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and feel free to donate if you feel inclined. Thank you, and if there's any other books you'd like me to do these summaries of, let me know. Maybe I can do them. Thank you.